Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 25 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. And I am so pleased to have struck lucky and found my guest at home this evening. So it's going to be with great pleasure that I open the lines to Thomas Sheridan in just a short while. Now, Thomas is certainly very well placed to make some comments and offer his insight into some of the things that are occurring right now on the global stage. But also, of course, he's able to offer that dispassionate view of what's occurring here in the UK, as Thomas is a resident of Southern Ireland, of the Republic of Ireland. Now, which has had some degree of independence since 1922. Unfortunately, much of that independence, of course, has been sucked away from it by the EU over the past 6 years or so. But there's an experience recently in the UK that Thomas would have been watching with considerable interest. And over the past few weeks, I've passed comment and observation on the Scottish independence situation, or lack of course, as the case is now. And interestingly, in the days running up to the vote on September the 18th, my videos, which were ostensibly supportive of the yes vote of those seeking their independence from Westminster, and those videos were, unfortunately, for some reason, not available in the days leading up to the vote. Now, last week I made the observation that just 3 days after the referendum, there was an increasing number of videos coming online which indicated that there had been a massive fraud perpetrated upon the people north of the border. And I have to say that a week on, I am even more of the opinion that this vote would have been very much at home in a Caribbean republic there, where the votes are effectively manipulated before people even turn up at the polling station. And I think that much of that was the case in Scotland. So I just want to show one short video, because this is a video which is indicative of the type of frauds that I think were perpetrated so that the establishment got the outcome that it wanted. Take a look at this.
Hi there. I got an anonymous phone call last night, and it says I was to go to near a bin near Duke Street. Beside that bin there'd be a wee white bag, and it'd be there'd be stuff in it maybe I would want to see. So I went there and I picked up this bag here, and what I found in it was this. You couldn't make your shit up, honestly. Obviously, people, it's either been a postmaster or it's been somebody that's intercepted these postal votes, or somebody that works in the postal place, the vote counting place or something. That's done all these. I'm not going to go to the police about this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to contact the electoral registration people, because this shouldn't be allowed to happen. I mean, these votes are clearly, every single one of them is a yes vote, and these are all in the bin. Every single one of them is a yes. This shouldn't be allowed. I mean, how would you feel, honestly, when there's people, they're going out their way, they're spending time to go down to a voting station to cast their vote, and their vote isn't even being counted. It's not even being counted. They've either sat and they've put their vote into the post box, you know, and they've posted it away and took the time and the effort, or they've went to the polling station and they've casted their votes, and they've just been rubbish. They've just been put in a bag, they've been taken out, put in a bin. Surely this is electoral fraud. This can't be right. I mean, how many other people have got bags like this, or these have been put in the bin? This is clear, terrible, and there's hundreds of them in that bag, hundreds of them in a bin bag, I'm not going to contact the police, but what I'm going to do is contact the electoral register or the electoral commission and ask them to investigate this, because this is all these allegations are all mounting up. Make your own decisions, make your own.
Well, just like the proverbial magician pulling rabbits out of the hat, in this case, pulling yes ballots out of the plastic bag. Now, clearly, the couple of dozen or whatever it was that he was pulling out of the bag yet there wasn't going to necessarily be enough to swing the vote. But how many more white plastic bags were deposited in trash cans around Scotland? Plus, of course, the footage that was shown on Russia Today, inadvertently, but which clearly showed yes ballots on top of boxes marked no. So, all in all, it would seem that there was a massive fraud, and obviously the Queen was able to purr down the phone at David Cameron once he was able to advise her that, yes, all the ducks were in the proverbial row, MI5 had done what they were supposed to do, and the ballot had been appropriately manipulated. Now, Thomas, have you come across anything of that ilk before?
Yes, the Lisbon vote in Ireland was very similar. There was almost this laissez-faire casual nature to the ballot stations that, you know, it was just like, oh, vote. And then, you see, because it's a referendum, there's a yes or no question. So it's very different than, say, you know, a regular ballot where you might have to make selections or multiple choices in, say, a parliamentary democracy where you'd have, like, proportional representation. But in a straightforward yes-no referendum, you can very easily delude yourself into believing that, you know, the people in the polling stations who, now I'm not talking about the people who count the votes, I'm talking about the ones who administer them, are just as honest as you are when you check the yes, no on the box. And I've seen videos of this kind of thing in Ireland. There was one specific one, and people look for it. It's some like strange events at Cork City Hall regarding the Lisbon Treaty. And the ballot boxes were delivered late at night, around midnight, mostly in taxis, which is very strange to begin with. Shouldn't, you know, police or some armed security place be removing them from the local polling stations? But anyone, just guys who could be anyone, show up with these boxes. Then you see other people walking out of the city hall with other boxes, polling boxes, getting into other cars. And the whole thing, you see how easy it would be to just say any result, yes or no, came in, whatever suits them. Because the entire thing is like, it's such a fate-based religion thing that, like, oh, I voted yes or no on my ballot paper, so therefore the people who oversee the vote will have the same level of respect and, you know, attention to detail that I have put into this matter. The reality is that it's the easiest thing in the world for someone to say, oh, you know, there's so many yes and so many no votes. And yes, you do have counters and you do have people who are overseers, and they do hire, you know, people from consultancy firms to be like almost, you know, actuaries and people like that, and, you know, quantifiers to actually oversee these votes. When you actually go into the hall, the most ridiculous thing, the person from the consulting firm will walk over to the polling manager and say, how many yes votes? And he'll say, oh, you know, 25,000. And then he'll walk away, and that's it. That's as much checking as he does. So it's the easiest thing in the world to rig a vote. Incredibly easy. Especially
well, I mean, just on that, I mean, in the two ballots in Ireland, the two referenda in Ireland, where the Irish people were given the opportunity to either accept or reject Ireland's ratification of the Treaty of Lisbon. They were barely 16 months apart. And in the first ballot, which of course the Irish people got the result wrong, and so consequently I'm inclined to believe that you know, the first ballot was you know, pretty much close to a genuine result. And in fact, the margin was 53.4% to 46.6%. But interestingly, only 53% of the electorate turned out, which actually is really quite low, I think, for something that was so important. But now the swing in the second ballot, which was in October 2009, and I did a series of talks in the run-up to that second ballot in Ireland. And I have to say that, you know, whilst I was there, obviously I did meet the odd individual who was planning on voting yes. But the vast majority of people that I spoke to, and I was speaking to random people in the streets, random people on the trains when I was travelling between Dublin and Cork and Dublin and Galway, and the vast majority told me categorically that they voted no the first time and they were going to vote no again. And yet the result in the second ballot was 67.1% in favour of the Treaty of Lisbon and only 32.9% against. So this time, obviously, the establishment not only wanted to make sure that they got the result that they wanted the first time round, but that there was sufficient margin to effectively negate any further debate.
It was even stranger than that, and it's even more absurd because I know not one single person who changed their vote from no to yes. Not one. But I can tell you something. I know quite a few who changed their vote from yes to no simply because they were so disgusted at the fact that the ballot the first time wasn't accepted by the European plutocrats. And they deliberately said, well, the hell with that, I'm voting no just as a protest this time. So if there was ever a swing vote, the swing vote would have been probably more towards more no votes. But the reality is that's not what they said happened. It was a shambolic episode. It showed that the EU are an extremely dangerous and vicious entity who must be considered, easily on par with the Russian Politburo. They have no regard for democracy. They have no regard for the same people in any EU state. And they threw down the gauntlet and they made it quite clear that they were not interested in people's opinions. We were to vote for what they wanted. And I can guarantee you that's exactly what's happened in Scotland. They probably didn't want the mess of another referendum. It was too tight.
Well, nonetheless, this one was still arguably relatively tight. It was only, 55-45 or thereabouts. But, I have to say that in Ireland at the time, unless I'd seen it for myself, I would never have believed it. Of course, it's illegal under the Irish Constitution for any foreign entity to effectively finance any kind of political campaign. And yet the Yes campaign was clearly financed by the EU. And the posters on the lampposts and the bus stops right throughout the country, were just incredible. It was an amazing attempt at programming the people for the desired outcome, when in reality, as you observe, in all probability, the true result was probably somewhere around the opposite of what was presented to the people, thus, of course, subjugating Ireland to the EU in perpetuity, pending some significant event.
Yes, and there was, I was thinking, funny, when the Scottish referendum was going on, I constantly kept thinking back to the Lisbon Treaty, the two votes here, and I was watching the Scottish media. Now, I wouldn't say I was watching as obsessively as I was watching the Irish media during the Lisbon vote, but it came out later after the Lisbon Treaty passed that the EU were flying vast numbers of Irish journalists from all newspapers, all media, all radio, out to European capitals with their families, putting them in top hotels, wining and dining them, and educating them, quote, educating them on the benefits of why European integration was so. It was shameless propaganda bought and paid for on every level. And I have no doubt that in time you'll probably find the same things happening with the Scottish referendum.
Yeah, I'm sure we will, and of course, all of the promises that were made in the last few hours in an attempt to get the desired result, or at least to justify the already known result, these promises have been pretty much completely forgotten, and not least, of course, the Scottish National Party have already let it be known that they're not supportive of the UK government's attempt to open up the central belt of Scotland to the unconventional gas industry, and I'll be talking more about that on Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock this evening. The fact that basically anything that the Scots were planning to do will now be shut down, almost as punishment. I mean, punishment to the Scottish National Party for having the audacity to even consider that they could initiate a referendum to break up the United Kingdom. Now, obviously, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Scots just roll over. Sadly, I think that's probably the case. I mean, obviously, such is the economic situation in the UK right now that those who are doing very well out of the union will continue to support the union, and those who are not doing very well won't have the time or the resource, even if they had the inclination, to really put up much of a fight. So that's the sad reality, and of course that will have already been worked through in the proverbial game theory.
Well, I hope the Yes people do continue their fight, because one of the, even though I'm, I was in, I said, I like yourself, I wanted the Yes side to win. More so that it was like, it was the Scottish people asserting that they wanted a different kind of future, which is always a good thing, even if it's something like this. And that was what was the great tragedy of this. Now, I will say something about Alex Salmond, that his immediate and instant resignation following the election result just doesn't sit well with me. It was almost like he was a consultant who was hired to bring about this referendum, regardless of result. And then once his consultancy was done, he left off for another job or something. I think that looked very bad, and it was almost it'd be much better if he said, we lost the day, but the fight begins a different way. He just resigned. Now, we have to understand he could have been tired, or he could have been worn out, or something like that from years of working on this. But it just sent out a very bad message. It was almost defeatist to anyone who'd want to continue. And so I do hope the Yes people and the people who are Scottish nationalists, they sincerely push forward with this, because Ireland, we did get our independence in 1922, but this was after several times we've been robbed of, genuine election results that would have swung it in our favor. It's almost like they want you to quit after the first one. I hope the opposite happens. I hope the Yes side gets even stronger and more resilient. I would just love to see them stand firmer on this, and I think they should. And I think it's still a very winnable thing in other ways.
I absolutely concur, and as I have said in previous programmes, I must confess that I felt that Alex Salmond was not the person to take Scotland beyond the referendum. But I agree with you. It was very strange that he should resign pretty much straight away. I mean, it was almost immature. I mean, it's almost adolescent. Yeah. Basically, it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to go then. That's it. If you're not going to support me, I'm going to go. Going to take my ball away. And maybe, I mean, it was very unfortunate. It did send out the wrong message, but just maybe it might actually give a stronger character the opportunity to come into that role, and, as you say, take Scotland to the next level, whatever level that may be, because it's going to be very interesting come the next election. Because I think that or my perception is that the Labour Party didn't exactly cover themselves in glory, so we may well see the rejuvenated Scottish National Party, whomever takes the leadership there, actually go from strength to strength and force another referendum, and the next time absolutely insist on international independent oversight of the count.
Yes, and also there was the loss of, the departure of Alex Salmond. It takes away this whole thing that the referendum is based on one individual. It's very important that something as serious as Scottish independence should never have a poster boy or a poster girl or be hinged on one person. It should be the Scottish people's, referendum. And so this is a great opportunity for the Scottish, independence lobby, people, movement, whatever, to begin now moving forward as a people structure rather than having a figurehead at the top. And I think that will only serve them well as this whole thing continues.
I think that's a great observation, and you know, we are seeing something similar emerging with the anti-fracking community across the UK. You know, a leaderless organisation, a flat organisation that pushes you know, responsibility, initiative, and creativity down to the lowest level. And you know, what you're able to achieve with that, of course, is far greater than you could ever achieve with any kind of hierarchical structure. Regardless of how charismatic the leader of that hierarchical structure may be. So, you know, I agree with you. It is a great opportunity. Now, moving on, obviously, when something of this ilk occurs and there is potential for much media discussion over the integrity of the count, then obviously for the establishment, it's absolutely crucial that they get something that is much bigger onto the front pages. And of course, you know, the game plan was always that CAMORON would use the immediate aftermath of the referendum, come out with his big play on the Middle East. But many people in this country are not aware that the day before CAMORON recalled Parliament to vote or ask for their support and to vote for an attack on Iraq, he was actually over at the United Nations, where he gave a fairly lengthy speech. It wasn't exactly a packed house, but the content of that speech was very, very interesting. Now, we don't have the time this evening to play the full length of David Cameron's speech, and I would encourage people, if you haven't seen David Cameron's UN speech from last week, then please go online. Please either watch the speech in full, I think it runs to close on 20-odd minutes or so, or read the transcript. But we're just going to show a short 3-minute clip here, which incorporates some very, very interesting and actually quite disturbing observation. So take a look at this.
The root cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism. This is nothing to do with Islam, which is a peaceful religion which inspires countless acts of generosity every day. Islamist extremism, on the other hand, believes in using the most brutal forms of terrorism to force people to accept a warped worldview and to live in a quasi-medieval state. To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear, to defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. For governments, there are some obvious ways we can do this. We must ban preachers of hate from coming to our countries. We must prescribe organizations that incite terrorism against people at home and abroad. We must work together to take down illegal online material like the recent videos of ISIL murdering hostages. And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. But I ask you, would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism. We need to argue that prophecies of a global war of religion pitting Muslims against the rest of the world, these things are nonsense. We need Muslims and their governments around the world to reclaim their religion from these sick terrorists as so many are doing and quite rightly doing today. We all need help, and to help them with programs that channel young people away from these poisonous ideologues. And we need the strongest possible international focus on tackling this ideology, which is why here at the United Nations, the United Kingdom is calling for a new special representative on extremism.
So this was a truly remarkable speech presented to a handful of delegates, almost as though it was a practice run, or almost as though it wasn't something that was on the formal UN agenda, but that Cameron needed to get onto that podium and present this diatribe. Now, like I said, that's only a short 3-minute clip of a speech that went for some 20 minutes, and it is diatribe. It is absolute double speak. And if one actually really breaks it down, it's almost a classic case of reflection. Everything that Cameron is accusing others of, he himself is effectively guilty of. But let's just pick up on one of the comments that he made there. Non-violent conspiracy theorists, if we can just pull this up on the screen, there we go. Non-violent conspiracy theorists are just as dangerous as the Islamic State. I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, actually, I am very grateful for David Cameron for making this statement, because what he's done is he has actually brought the issues that he refers to in the speech of 9/11. Now, he makes this outrageous statement of those who present the events of 9/11 as a Jewish conspiracy. Now, I haven't looked at 9/11 in any great depth for the past nearly 7 years. In fact, a little over 7 years. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and then through the London bombings of 7/7, 2005, and then for the next 2 years, I was focused almost entirely on breaking down those events and encouraging people to look at the information that was and the evidence that was in the public domain and draw their own conclusions. And the conclusion that I certainly reached is that the physical evidence does not in any way, shape or form support the official version of events, either of 9/11 or 7/7. Now, I have never heard anybody specifically state that the events of 9/11 were a Jewish conspiracy. I myself have said that there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that there are elements within the CIA, with MI6 and with Mossad, who clearly have the capacity, the capability and the motivation to perpetrate such an event. And when we look at the evidence to support that statement, it's very clear that this event was not perpetrated by 19 random Muslims wielding plastic box cutters. So, thanks to David Cameron, over the past few days, an incredible amount of information on both 9/11 and 7/7 has been moving around the alternative media and the social media, and even some information that I hadn't seen before. So thank you, David Cameron. You have ensured that I have had my education added to over the past weekend, and now I'm even better positioned to discuss these issues than I may have been previously, even though I haven't actually addressed them for some 7 years. So this, of course, preceded Cameron's overnight flight back to London, and by the afternoon he was back at Parliament and holding court there as he sought to overturn the defeat of August 2013, where he was defeated by just 13 votes. This time round, however, obviously the whips had made sure that all the dissenters of 2013 had either had their skeletons uncovered and threats to reveal those skeletons, or they had been made promises, political promises, along the lines of the promises made to the Scottish people, as to how they might benefit in the event of supporting Cameron's quest for unleashing another military onslaught onto, effectively, the civilian population of Iraq, although with a reference that it may be necessary to expand into Syria. So, Thomas, I mean, looking in from the outside, what is your take on events of last Thursday and Friday?
Well, I couldn't hear the sound on that video, so he looked even more like a Thunderbird puppet on the old TV show. I think they're disgusting comments, that slide you put up on the screen. They're disgusting for a number of reasons. How could non-violent people be as dangerous as, a religious fanatic that's willing to kill, if they exist? I don't believe they do exist, this ISIS group. Now, we're moving the goalpost into very dangerous territory here. Firstly, he's saying that basically we can deny people who are investigating government conspiracies or inappropriate behavior or any kind of crimes as terrorists. See, they got their backsides burned big time with the weapons of mass destruction, when those conspiracies turned out to be true. And they don't want that happening again. So they want to shut people down. It also shows, to actually say a Jewish conspiracy, this is absolutely revolting on so many levels. Firstly, it portrays people who might be genuinely investigating any anomalies in the 9/11 story. I'm not an expert in 9/11. I don't really have much interest in it. When it happened, a few days afterwards, I thought to myself, it's something dodgy going on here. And then I never thought that was enough for me. I didn't have to go into all the specific details. But the first real mainstream, big time 9/11 conspiracy that was ever put out there was put out there by Michael Moore in the film Fahrenheit 9/11, which he spoke about the Bin Laden family being mysteriously spirited out of the United States on the day of the attack. Is this a Jewish conspiracy? No, this is just journalism. What journalism is supposed to do. I'm not defending Michael Moore. I'm just saying in general. You ask questions when the things don't happen. This is a disgusting tactic that he's implemented here. Okay, so now every conspiracy theorist or anyone who's independently researching the 9/11 story is automatically now declared an anti-Semite. If you go to these neo-Nazi websites, you'd be quite surprised to find out that they don't even consider it a Jewish conspiracy. They consider it an Arab. They buy the mainstream story hook, line, and sinker because they have a problem mostly with Arabs than anything else. And so it's a very strange comment to make on every level. I don't know why he did that. I don't know what that was about, but it's something this just confirms what I've been thinking about for a long time, that it's something more than this ISIS thing, this Syria thing is coming. There's an increasing viciousness in the language used by the establishment regarding upholding their own little, agendas and propaganda, and that's just one of them. And the fact that wasn't covered in the mainstream that much tells us a lot that there's something going on here. It's almost like he was giving a message to other countries saying it's time to start shutting up or closing down anyone who has a dissident mindset, an anti-government mindset, and start portraying them as like Nazis and anti-Semites. But I do agree with him on one statement. When he said that non-violent conspiracy theorists are as dangerous as ISIS, I agree with that. You know why? Because ISIS doesn't exist, therefore it's not dangerous.
Absolutely. ISIS obviously is a creation, just like Al-Qaeda was a creation, as Robin Cook so eloquently presented in his resignation speech, which we showed on a previous edition of Humanity versus Insanity. I agree with you. There is no question that to the establishment, whether you want to use the term conspiracy theorist, I am always quite flattered when people actually throw that title in my direction, because basically what it acknowledges is that they're acknowledging that I've done the research, they haven't, and consequently they're not in a position to offer any kind of intellectual debate. They can only hide behind the official version of events and what they've read in the mainstream media. They can only repeat what they have read in the mainstream media, and so therefore they resort to the term that was effectively invented by Ayn Rand during the Nixon period, and the term was invented to effectively marginalize those who tried to suggest that Nixon was anything other than a fine, upstanding US president. And of course, that term has stuck, and it has become a term of demonization and marginalization. I basically make the observation is I'm certainly not a conspiracy theorist. I don't present theories. I do actually research the facts and I join the dots. But if I'm a theorist, then the only way it could be applied is the coincidence theorist. And obviously, in many of these situations, there are far too many coincidences that do not actually serve to support the official version of events. But I agree with you, Thomas. Something is coming here because it's far bigger than just the UK, because also last week, Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia, announced Orwellian surveillance powers for the Australian security services, effectively granting them the power to surveil anyone and anything if they deem them to be any kind of threat to national security. He granted the government the power to effectively put a D notice on almost anything that he considered to be whistleblowing. So he's effectively made whistleblowing illegal and threatened journalists with up to 10 years imprisonment if they report on said whistleblowing. So, I think we can possibly see that Australia here is being used as the testing ground for this kind of Orwellian legislation.
It's not just Australia. It's in Scandinavian countries. It's already been rolled out a few years, particularly in places like Norway. There's nothing. We get the impression, we have this myopic view that the English-speaking world, UK, USA, and the rest of them are on the forefront of this totalitarianism. In reality, they're probably not even at the forefront. They're dragging their heels a bit because it represents a much bigger demographic in terms of population than any other place on earth. But they're rolling it out in smaller places first, and it's Eastern Europe and Scandinavia being one of them. Can I just go back to the thing about conspiracy theorists? I'm old enough to remember when conspiracy theorists were not laughed at. Conspiracy theories back in the 80s and 90s was just a kind of an alternative insight or look at the world and anomalies in social events. It was not even considered that weird. Many intellectuals and academics used to indulge in conspiracy theories. It was seen as almost like the touch paper of journalistic investigation. Every journalistic investigation from Watergate and all the others, at those times began with initial conspiracy theory that something was awry here, and from that the investigation began. They've turned that term around, conspiracy theory, to change it into something that dehumanizes people. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Therefore, you're not only intellectually degraded, but you're also dehumanized now, especially since CAMORON's statement. This is a relatively new thing, this idea that you're a conspiracy theorist, because that was held as just as I said, a touch paper, the spark of real investigation for centuries, for decades anyway, many decades. And so, and another one I'd like to say to people is, if someone calls you a conspiracy theory, just shrug your shoulders and say, yeah, whatever, and walk away. You don't have to argue with them. But I would say to people, call yourself a conspiracy theorist before you call yourself a truther. I don't like the idea of this truther thing, because there's an inherent fanaticism in it that I have to get to the truth and that's the end of it. It's much better to have this idea that something is awry and that's good, and then investigate it, throw your ideas out there, and if they don't stick, that's okay. If some do, they do. But don't be doing it with a kind of zealotry that this is the absolute truth because you're a truther, because I'm starting to think this idea of this whole truther thing may have actually now been invented by the powers that be to sort of get people in a conspiratorial mindset an otherwise healthy conspiratorial mindset to become very passionate about defending it. And I always say to people, if you have a conspiracy theory about something, don't be passionate about to the point where you're arguing and shouting at people. Present your facts in a respectful and intelligent way to the best information you have, and then walk away. I can see the day when the term conspiracy theory will come right back full circle again and be accepted as a legitimate form of early investigative research, which it always used to be and always will be. And so you're absolutely right about that. Now, go back, this guy, CAMORON guy, when he said this, the more now I'm thinking about this, they're really afraid of, many people are probably now openly thinking of themselves as someone who indulges conspiracy. And I think this is what they're really frightened by. And then he throws that despicable Jewish thing about 9/11 into it to try and make them feel that, if they start having doubts about government, people will call them an anti-Semite. I just think it's two things that are being shown here. One, something big is coming, and forget Syria, and it's something massive. It's something we haven't even thought about yet, because psychopaths are always 25 steps ahead of us. And two, they're afraid of people who are woken up to their lies and to their nonsense and are increasingly skeptical and fed up and are sick of it. And this X factor kind of like diplomacy that the likes of CAMORON and Obama get up to, it's just not flying anymore for a lot of people. People are looking for real answers, and I think they're terrified. I absolutely do think they're terrified. It's almost like there's a race going on here to stop people from getting sense, or before they implement whatever this appalling plan they have in the works.
Yep, Thomas, you're absolutely right, of course. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, just a few years ago, made the observation that the greatest hurdle to establishing the one world government, the global corporatist government, was the rapid political awakening of the masses. And he also, by the way, went on to say that it's actually easier to kill 1 million people than it is to control them. But we always knew that that's the kind of mindset that we're dealing with. Well, we're coming towards the end of the program, and I just want to make the observation that when I'm out giving public talks, I always make the observation that I'm not there. I'm not giving presentations to argue with people. I'm not giving presentations to encourage them to adopt my worldview. Quite the opposite. All I'm trying to do is to stimulate their own curiosity so that they will practice epistemological integrity, and they will actually take responsibility for their worldview. When people actually stop and break down how much of their worldview is based on genuine knowledge through experience or their own research, and how much is simply based on repeated information pumped out by the media, they're absolutely shocked. And I think the final word on this subject of questioning the official version of events must go to David Ray Griffin. And this is a seminal book. And thank you once again, David Cameron, for reminding me of David Ray Griffin's book. This book was actually written some 11 years ago, The New Pearl Harbor. David Ray Griffin he's retired now, but he was a professor of religious philosophy at Claremont College in California. And David Ray Griffin absolutely bought in to the official version of events. But he was challenged by his students and some fellow members of his faculty who reminded him that he encouraged them to reach a goal of epistemological integrity and that they should challenge everything. Well, they suggested that he might want to take a look at the events of 9/11. He told them that this was just a conspiracy theory. But when he got home, they'd sent him some links on his email, and in his own words, when he sat down at his computer at 9 o'clock in the evening and looked at some of these links, he finally went off to bed at 6 o'clock in the morning, realizing that from this point forward, he may have a very different worldview. Over the past decade plus, David Ray Griffin has written a number of books on the subject of 9/11. His follow-up to the New Pearl Harbor was the 9/11 Commission, Omissions and Distortions. So do check out David Ray Griffin if you haven't come across this remarkable man then I would certainly encourage you to do so. Thomas Sheridan, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you so much for your insights from the Republic of Ireland. And I'm hoping, Thomas, that you will join us at AV6 next year back in the UK.
Well, thank you very much. I'd be delighted to do AV6. I had so much fun at AV5. And yes, if you're officially asking now, the answer is officially yes.
Excellent. Thanks very much for joining me tonight. Hopefully, I'll see you again in 45 minutes at 9 o'clock on Fracking Nightmare.